Hello, a very good evening to you. It's Ian Dale at Drive, here with you every weekday between 4 and 8 here on LBC. Well, every Thursday, Tessa Jowell joins me in the studio. You can watch us at lbc.co.uk right now. She's the one on the left, as you might imagine. In this hour, in our Newsmaker hour, we're going to be talking to Mark Watts from XRO News, and also Alastair Campbell will be joining us after 7:30. But we want to start off by really reviewing what we've just heard about the Vishal Malhotra case. Very worrying case. Should it be reopened? You might have your questions for Mark Watts or Alastair Campbell. 0345 6060 973. Tessa, good evening.
Good evening, Ian. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and welcome to the studio, Mark Watts, a familiar face for us here on LBC. And as I say, don't forget, you can watch the next hour live on our website at lbc.co.uk. Now, as you've heard, we were talking about the Vishal Malhotra case a little earlier. Let's go back to our senior reporter, Tom Swarbrick. He's been the one who's been reporting on this for the last few weeks. Tom, that was the concluding part of your investigation, but where does it go from here?
Well, yes, I think concluding for now, because to my mind it is almost inevitable that the calls to have this case reopened are just going to grow and grow, given what we now know seems to have gone on regarding the police investigations, not only at the Metropolitan Police, but also at Sussex Police into this case, or rather what didn't go on. Because time and time again, the police, to the father, have just not shown their workings. They have not made it clear what they have done to rule out particular people whose names crop up time and time again. And that is a situation that I don't think Vishal Malhotra, Vishal's father, is going to accept any longer. You know, he has said to me in quieter moments when the recording tape has not been on, that this is really now the time where he has felt able, where his grief has not been so all-consuming, that he is able now to look at this case rather more, not objectively, it sounds a bit cold, but just to look at the police, what the police may have done, because he has said previously that at the time he just handed trust over to them. He thought the police were going to do as full a job as they possibly could, and he now is left with the impression that police didn't, and he's not going to stand for that now.
Tom, stay there a second. I want to have a word quickly with Zach Goldsmith, Conservative MP for Richmond Park. Zach joins us on the line. Good evening.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well. Now, you've been following Tom's investigation into the Vishal Malhotra case. Where do you think it should go from here?
Well, I just do want to say, first of all, that Tom Swarbrick has done some really amazing journalistic work. The case he's put together is absolutely overwhelming, and he's done an enormous service, not just to the family, who have a slightly better chance now of obtaining justice, but also as part of a much bigger picture that you and I have spoken about previously, and that is that, you know, this tragic story is really a microcosm of something much, much bigger, and that is that there is overwhelming evidence that there have been a number of, maybe many, many cover-ups relating to child abuse by powerful people, and this might just be one of those stories. But what is particularly appalling and grotesque in this story is that there are just so many examples where key evidence has not been looked at, where key trails have not been followed, key questions have not been asked or let alone answered, and where the family has just been appallingly let down. So I think it's a really valuable thing that LBC and Tom in particular have done here, and I'm hugely grateful. I know a lot of people are too.
Do you think the police should now reopen the investigation formally?
Absolutely. I think that the evidence, if only the evidence that has been provided on LBC, if that was the only evidence, then the case is overwhelming, and it absolutely should be opened up again. And I know that there's plenty of other evidence out there, and there's more evidence coming in. I do have one concern. I mean, obviously I want this case to be open, partly for the family, but partly just simply for the sake of justice. But I think it raises other concerns as well. I know there are concerns that people who were junior policemen at the time, who now have things which they can provide to the investigation, information that they can provide, which may be really valuable, but who are nevertheless nervous about coming forward. And I know that the government line is that the protections are in place, that there will be no repercussions for whistleblowers and so on, but that message has not yet got through. And there are examples of people who are nervous. And I have actually raised this with the Home Secretary. She's aware of the need for some kind of action, whether it's a statement by the Attorney General, whether it's a direct communication between the Attorney General and Dame Justice Goddard, who's handling this enormous CSA inquiry. So something will happen. I'm not sure entirely what, but clarity will be provided, and I think that's really important.
Zach, thank you very much. That's Zach Goldsmith, the Conservative MP for Richmond Park. Tessa, do you think that a lot of the people like Vishal's father, Vishal Malhotra, do you think that he's likely to get justice? There are lots and lots of other cases where people think they'll never get justice. Do you think people can have hope?
Well, I think people can have hope, like Vishal's father, if they're lucky enough to meet a journalist like Tom Swarbrick, or, to be honest, to be represented, of their interest to be represented by someone like Zach Goldsmith. The key thing is believability and just that sense of there being something wrong here. And that's what, obviously, Vishal's father has been able to communicate. And at that point, you're not on your own anymore. But I think what's disturbing, and we were just talking, Mark and I were talking earlier about all my years as a constituency MP, and it's common that people come to see you in order to raise injustice, long-term injustice, and you have to make a judgment. And you have to live with the possibility that sometimes you may have missed something or pursued something which turned out to have actually no wrongdoing. But this obviously, I mean, having listened to the podcasts, I mean, this is obviously a case where there's got to be further investigation and it's got to be reopened.
Well, let's hear from you as well. 0345 6060 973. Do you think that we will ever find justice in some of these cases? Well, as I say, Mark Watts from XRO News is with us. Mark, listening to that report from Tom and listening to Zach Goldsmith there, I think a lot of people will be thinking, well, there are some outrageous things that have gone on here. Why weren't these cases dealt with properly by the police at the time? What do you think the motivation was on behalf of some of the senior police officers who just seem to sort of brush these cases aside?
Well, actually, as a journalist, you always are very wary about wondering about people's motives because it's very hard to get to that. One can speculate endlessly. What you can do, though, is look at the evidence. And one of the very important things to realise about, in a sense, the extraordinary comments that Vishal's father has made, this retired magistrate saying what his suspicions are on the basis of things that have happened. The point is, as Tessa and Zach said earlier, he's not alone. There's a whole load of other elements to this story of the wider picture of the abuse and the cover-up. And we are in a position where it's as if the official authorities are being dragged into recognising the problem. And to be frank, I've lost count. Is it now 17 separate cases? I think it's more than that. At least it was 17 in the first tranche, where the IPCC is investigating corruption, their word, alleged corruption, of cover-ups of child sex abuse by prominent people.
But you see, and I think Tessa will probably agree with this, that people of her generation, my generation, have grown up thinking, no, all of these allegations against the police that are made from time to time, it's complete rubbish. We have total trust in the police, and yet we have case after case after case where we have to call into question that trust.
Well, indeed, and the position we're now is the IPCC has said that we need to oversee investigations into so many instances of closed operations. We ran a series of reports on XRO, which was based on private posts to a closed forum by former police officers who were all talking about this. I mean, not openly, because they didn't think it was in the open, unfortunately, in a way. Or maybe fortunately, I think fortunately, XRO was watching what they were saying. And I know you've had one or two calls here, Ian, and you've taken, you can't be sure who they are, but you think they're former police officers who are basically chiming with what these definite former police officers were posting on this private forum. And it came down to the idea, and this is relevant in this particular case, where investigations were being conducted into what people might traditionally have thought of as the criminal paedophile, the likes of Sidney Cook and Leslie Bailey and so on. And then as the investigation has advanced, typically with surveillance operations being carried out, suddenly more high-profile people come into view, literally, and the operation is closed down by those senior police officers that you mentioned earlier, and we do not know why. One can speculate why. I think it's important to remember that, I think there's been a wholesale change in attitude. I think there has been at the police and elsewhere, and there is a different attitude. Whether we'll get to justice was a long road to travel on that one.
Tom, just a second, Tessa, because we have to go to the travelling. I just want to bring Tom Swarbrick in very, very quickly. Tom, you've been listening to Zach Goldsmith, to what Mark Watts has said. Do you think that in your discussions with the Metropolitan Police, when you've been talking about this investigation, do you think attitudes have changed?
Yes, I think there has been a sea change in attitude, given from what we're hearing from, particularly in the case of Vishal Malhotra. And Mark is absolutely right. Key to this are the former police officers who worked on these cases feeling comfortable and confident enough to come forward without the risk of being prosecuted. And they don't. And that is a massive issue, and that is preventing, and Zach Goldsmith has said it earlier, as has Tessa, that is preventing justice from happening, is this ludicrous scenario in which these officers could be prosecuted because they signed the Official Secrets Act. And the problem there is the Official Secrets Act is not there to protect perpetrators. It is there to protect the victims. And we seem to have got this bizarrely the wrong way around.
Tessa, just a quick comment. Do you think the government got it right on the Official Secrets Act? Because the Theresa May has said, look, the Attorney General has to give approval for any kind of prosecution. He's just not going to do it.
No, it's got to be made easier in a spirit of greater openness, and because even police forces default to a kind of inertia when these kind of complaints are raised.
So it's got to be formalised, this process.
Absolutely, yes. Okay. But the threshold is too high at the moment.
So do you think we'll ever find justice in cases like that of Vishal Malhotra? 0345 6060 973. We have Mark Watts with us for the next 15 minutes. If you'd like to ask him a question about any aspect of the child sex abuse inquiry, is there a Westminster paedophile ring? He and his colleagues have been doing some amazing investigative work into that. We've had today Leon Britton's correspondence with Geoffrey Dickens released. We may want to ask him about that too. 0345 6060 973. This is LBC. It's 17 minutes past 7.
Sadmore in the LBC Travel Centre on the M25. There's a lane shut clockwise for a breakdown. It's between junction 14, Heathrow Terminal 4, and the M4 at junction 15. The congestion there back to junction 13 for Staines and the A30. Romford A12 westbound, the lights are out there at Barley Lane, that's causing delays. Newbury Park, the A12 Eastern Avenue, heading away from town. A lane's closed after an accident involving a van and a lorry at Crownfield Avenue, so do expect delays there. Hammersmith, the A4 out of town, a lane blocked. That's after a coach broke down just after the Hammersmith flyover. That's causing queues back into Kensington round the A4 at Thurlow Place. And Barking, the North Circular, queuing northbound after an accident near the Barking flyover. Keeping London moving, our next update in 15 minutes.
LBC Travel.
With Citrix Go-To Meeting. Be in the boardroom when you're out of the office.
Bar stools, office chairs, shelving, whiteboards, plastic boxes, cleaning trolleys, cantilever racking, lockers and ladders, lockers and ladders, kick steps, pallet trucks, safes and stackers, archive boxes, office.
AJ Products has over 15,000 products for office, school, warehouse and industry. You will find surprisingly more at ajproducts.co.uk.
Homebase, you can make it a summer of colour with 3 for 2 on leading paint brands. Dulux, Cuprinol, Weathershield, Hammerite and our Dulux Paint Mix Lab. Plus, you can mix and match across their interior and exterior ranges. Homebase. Make your house your home. Offer available in-store, cheapest item free.
What about this one, love?
Is it semi-detached?
Yeah.
Is it 3 bedrooms? Does it have an ensuite?
Yeah.
Gas central heating? Garden?
Yep.
South-facing?
Yeah.
Conservatory?
Yep.
Shops nearby?
Yeah.
Off-road parking?
Yeah.
Double glazing? Does it have a walk-in wardrobe?
It's got a shed.
It's difficult enough choosing the right house. At NatWest, we help make choosing your mortgage easier. We can even tell you how much you could borrow in just 10 minutes. Talk to us today about our lowest ever mortgage rates, or search NatWest Mortgages.
Imagine what you could do with £1 million. And now imagine what you could do with £70 million. There's a Euro Millions jackpot event from the National Lottery this Friday, and you could win a staggering £70 million. Play makes it possible. Estimated jackpot. Games rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
What can you fit into the spacious Honda Jazz? What can't you fit into it, more like? There's room for family, friends and flat pack furniture, thanks to its magic seats that fold 180 ways. And now the Jazz is available with complimentary upgrade from the 1.2 SE to the 1.4 ES Plus, worth £1,500. What can you fit into the spacious Honda Jazz? Your life, that's what. See your local Honda dealer for 0% APR representative. Terms and conditions apply.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Would you take a test that predicts when you're going to die? If I did it and it's told me I was going to die in 2 years' time, I'm just going to have the worst 2 years of my life.
If I knew the date that I was going to die on, or roughly when I was going to die, I think that would stay on my conscience for a while, if not for the rest of my life.
Charity collectors to chug off. Chuggers, charity muggers. Dozens of towns across the country now have banned those chuggers from their streets. Right, you're at your front door, and I'm going to... Here we go.
What are you doing here?
Hello, yes, I've got a fantastic opportunity. I'm collecting on behalf of the Ferrari Home for Dispossessed Radio Presenters.
Move away from the property.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Every weekday morning from 7 on LBC.
With Hampton by Hilton, with over 2,000 hotels worldwide.
21 minutes past 7, talking of dispossessed radio presenters. Tessa Jowell is with me. I'm not sure what she's been dispossessed of recently.
The ultimate dispossession?
It's our Newsmakers Hour. We will be talking to Alastair Campbell a little bit later, but for the next 10 minutes or so, it's your chance to put your questions, if you'd like to Mark Watts, the editor of XRO News. They've been doing some great work on the child sex abuse inquiry. Tessa?
Well, I wonder if, while people are thinking about their questions to you, Mark, you mightn't just say there will be people listening tonight who have information, think they may have information. How do you get heard? What if you just think you're going to be brushed away by social services, by the police? What's your advice to people?
Well, people do have to weigh that up, because I know that people in that situation, whether they're former police officers, abuse survivors, or people who are in the system one way or the other, be it social workers or whatever, that they're often worried about talking to the police for several reasons. It is absolutely the case. We touched on it earlier, but I can tell you that we have spoken to former police officers who are extremely worried about disclosing information and being done under the Official Secrets Act later, and that's notwithstanding all the assurances that have been given. Now, it happens to be my view that people are overly scared of the Official Secrets Act, that actually, when you think about it, would a jury really convict in such a case? But that's me taking a slightly independent, sort of legalistic view. If you're that former police officer worried about the prospect of being hauled into court, I can tell you that fear and that worry is absolutely tangible. I mean, I can only say what's happened in the past. I mean, why is it that Operation Fernbridge started in the beginning, which was focused on Elm Guest House, and why Operation Midland launched, which was specifically into the murder of 3 boys during child sex abuse by the Westminster Paedophile Network, as alleged by a witness called Nick. What happened in these cases is people came to us, XRO, first, and say in Nick's case, we published part of his story. We didn't get into we didn't talk about the murders initially. We just talked about his allegations of child sex abuse, and we did that because we had another separate witness unknown to him who testified to very similar things. He hadn't witnessed the same 3 murders, but he talked about the same perpetrators in the same venues, or at least there was a good deal of overlap. So where there was overlap, we ran a story which was, in a sense, very muted.
And you thought he was credible because of the corroboration of...
Partly the corroboration, but also the witnesses themselves. We thought individually they were credible, and certainly where they corroborated and overlapped, we thought this was worth running. And it was worth running, because what happened was the police contacted us and said, we'd really like to speak to your 2 witnesses. And of course, we never pass on the details of confidential sources, which they were. They were not publicly identified. They didn't want to be. So in no circumstances do we disclose confidential sources to anyone. It's a golden rule for journalists. It certainly is at XRO. Maybe not at some news international titles, but there we are. And so what we do is we go back to the person concerned. We went back to Nick and went back to the other witness and thought the answer would be no, but we thought we'd pass on the request. And this has happened. This does happen from time to time, and we pass on the request, and it's up to them to decide what to do. And in Nick's case, he decided that he would have an initial meeting on one or two conditions. And the key condition was he wanted our reporter, who he'd obviously got to know, he wanted him there for assurance, and because he wanted certain assurances before he would go any further with it. And it was an initial meeting that went very well, and this led to the launch of Operation Midland, which is one of many operations, but this one is huge in itself. It's an investigation into allegations of child sex abuse that took place, according to Nick, at Dolphin Square and other venues by an array of prominent people, and indeed people he doesn't know the identity of, and 3 murders of boys. Now, I should stress here that Nick is not able to identify who those 3. He doesn't know their name. He didn't know their names at the time.
And how long ago was this?
So this goes back to sort of 1979 to 1982. From memory, that's the period we're talking about. But the descriptions he gave do not match Vishal's. It doesn't match Vishal's. So we're certain as certain can be that he did not witness anything happening to Vishal. Now, that's not to say that the father is wrong to suspect a link to the Westminster paedophile network. I happen to believe he's correct to think that, but we're pretty clear.
Why do you think that?
Why do I think that? Well, the reason he thinks that is because of that curious telephone call he received, where an anonymous caller said it was linked to Elm Guesthouse, obviously before the world knew about Elm Guesthouse. Now, as it happens, I mean, there's an awful lot we know that we can't publish for all sorts of reasons. You know, it's a difficult process, but actually we think that it wasn't linked to Elm Guesthouse. That's a bit of a red herring. But nonetheless, and the reason the father, because this was raised with him, he thinks that there's a link, and I suppose there are reasons that I can't go into that make me think he's right.
But you see, what gets me about this is that, I mean, you are a journalist. Tom Swarbrick is a journalist. You have both uncovered a huge amount of things in the relatively short time that you two. I mean, when did Exaro start? When did you start looking at this whole
About
issue?
2.5 years ago, which is quite a long time.
Well, it is, okay, it is quite a long time, but you haven't got the resources that the Metropolitan Police have. You're not a police officer. You're not trained in police techniques,
and we don't have police powers,
or indeed the money. So how come that you and Tom and other journalists who've done a lot in this area can uncover all of this, and the police apparently can't, won't, or don't intend to?
Well, that is a good question. I think the thing is that while we don't have the powers that the police have, we're trusted. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is trust. But I really hope that will change, because there's lots of reasons to remain worried about the police. I mean, I think institutionally we have reasons to remain worried, but our experiences, and we can only talk about our experience in terms of Nick and other witnesses, there are definitely individual officers out there. There are officers working on these cases who are completely committed to getting results.
But you see, I think I just wanted to pick, because I think that's a really important question, Ian. And it's, I suppose, the balance in the work that you're doing, and as you're describing the history of these cases within enormous detail over a very long period of time, the extent to which you are a kind of investigation bureau seeking justice and exposing wrongdoing, and to what extent you're like a news agency with a principally journalistic aim.
We are a journalistic operation. I mean, that is what we are.
So your interest here is wrongdoing,
uncovering the truth,
and uncovering the truth, particularly in relation to behaviour, corrupt behaviour by the police.
Indeed, and others. In fact, our tagline is holding power to account, and I can't think of a more precise example of how one might be doing that than on this particular investigation. Of course, Exaro's role here is to try to uncover the truth, and I feel that we're pulling that pulling it out gradually. I mean, we don't know the full truth yet, but we're sort of getting there.
And just more generally, I think a lot of people felt with the advent of the decline of national newspapers, for example, that investigative journalism was in danger, and that it might even sort of not exist in 10 years' time. But your organisation is almost living proof that investigative journalism is alive and well.
Well, in a sense, XRO was set up 3.5 years ago in order to take up, as it were, investigative journalism that was on the decline in national newspapers, although it still happens there from time to time, but it was certainly on the decline.
How are you funded? Who pays for you?
We found an investor to put the money in to get us going, and of course, we're not a commercial operation in the sense that we're not a money making operation. I mean, this kind of journalism is pretty expensive. I mean, we're quite small. I mean, we're quite a small unit, but nonetheless,
you don't come cheap though, do you?
Well, I think I don't know what to say to that. But yes, I think you're right.
That's the point, isn't it?
But one of the things we do is we often work with all sorts of mainstream media outlets, both national newspapers and broadcasters, and of course often here on LBC. And so I suppose one of the things we're effectively doing is we're finding things out, and because we're a small operation, quite a small platform with a relatively small audience, we work with mainstream media outlets who of course have a much bigger audience, and it's clear in this particular investigation it's had an enormous impact because it has forced authorities to take this seriously.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. That's Mark Watts from XRO News, and we can find you at xronews.com. I thought I was right in that. Tessa, Jowell and I will be back in a moment, and we'll also welcome Alastair Campbell into the studio. If you have questions for Alastair, 0345 6060 973. I'm Ian Dale at Drive, LBC News Time at 7:31. News headlines with Ros Unwin.
MPs are calling for the case of a murdered 8-year-old boy to be reopened following an LBC investigation. Vishal Malhotra disappeared in southwest London 33 years ago. LBC's found possible links between his murder and a notorious paedophile gang. MP Zach Goldsmith has told Ian and Tessa Vishal's family have been failed by the authorities.
What is particularly appalling and grotesque in this story is that there have just so many examples where key evidence has not been looked at, where key trails have not been followed, key questions have not been asked or let alone answered, and where the family has just been appallingly left down.
Shares in Royal Mail are down nearly 3% following the government's announcement that it's selling off its final 30% stake in the firm. The Communications Works Union says the move threatens the Universal Postal Service. The Queen has given her grandson, Prince Harry, a knighthood in a private ceremony at Buckingham Palace. Harry was made a Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order. The business news, HSBC has agreed to pay nearly £28 million to settle a money laundering investigation by prosecutors in Geneva. Authorities there say the bank had organisational deficiencies which allowed the practice to take place in its Swiss arm. Lloyds is reportedly to be fined more than £100 million for mishandling PPI complaints. The bank set aside more than £12 billion to deal with compensation claims. The boss of Marks & Spencer's has received a bonus of more than £500,000. It's after the company's first increase in annual profits for 4 years. The FTSE's closed down at 91 points at 68.59. And LBC weather, a dry and warm night for London and the southeast, lows of 16 degrees. Remaining cloudy across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Thundery showers developing across southeastern and eastern parts by dawn. Tomorrow hot and humid with some thundery downpours possible in the afternoon. Highs of 26 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Ros Unwin.
This is Adam Moore in the LBC Travel Centre. M25, first of all, clockwise, a lane shut for a lorry which has broken down between junction 14, Heathrow Terminal 4, junction 15 for the M4. Queues there back to junction 13 at Staines. In Hammersmith, the A4 is queuing away from town after a coach broke down earlier near the Hammersmith flyover. That's gone now, but the queues are back to Brompton Road. Chiswick, the Chiswick roundabout, there's reports of a breakdown there on the roundabout, causing some delays. Barking, the North Circular, queuing northbound after an accident between the Barking flyover and Ilford Hill. That's causing big queues all the way back to the Beckton roundabout and the A13. Keeping London moving, your next update is in 15 minutes.
LBC Travel.
With Citrix Go-To Meeting, bringing your clients closer to your business.
You can hear what I have to say on LBC. Now you can read it too. I'm Steve Allen. Make sure you pick up the new series of books from LBC's presenters. In mine, I'll take you on an insightful tour of the underbelly of the celebrity world. This is your essential guide to one of the most bonkers aspects of modern Britain. So you want to be a celebrity? The new LBC book from me, Steve Allen.
Pick up your copy now from Foyles Bookshops or at foyles.co.uk for the special price of just £6.99. For more details, go to lbc.co.uk. Ian Dale at Drive on LBC.
7:34 here on LBC, listening to our Newsmakers Hour. Tessa, Jowell is here with me. You can watch us at lbc.co.uk. You can watch Alastair Campbell deciding whether to put his headphones on or not. I think he probably should. 0345 6060 973. Alastair's with us until 8 o'clock. If you'd like to ask him a question, that's the number to call. 0345 6060 973. So, Tessa, Jowell, there is lots to ask Alastair Campbell about. What would you like to start with?
Well, I think we should start sadly with Alastair's intervention this week, and I mean the really beautiful blog you wrote about Charles Kennedy, which I think captured for everybody who read it and followed it up on Twitter. You expressed better what people would have said themselves, but were feeling, and I just wondered how long you'd been thinking about it for before. Had you kind of rehearsed it in your head? Or did you just sit down and write it when you heard he died?
No, I hadn't rehearsed it in my head at all. I got a phone call on the day he died from his friend Carol, and just as you was absolutely poleaxed. Told Fiona, woke Fiona up, told her, and then
what time is it that Carol rang?
Well, Fiona was in bed. It was pretty late, and then. It just sort of, and then through the next few hours, sort of trying to work out, and obviously she was in shock, Sarah was in shock, everybody was in shock. Charles has a sister in Canada, young boys, you know, and it was just, so it was, and then what I did do is I said, look, I'm really worried that this is just going to come out, just that the police will know, the ambulance people know, and it'll just come out in the middle of the night and people will think all sorts of things. And then somebody tweeted something, and I kindly asked them to take it down. And then, so I did draft a short statement for them, which is what Carol had asked me to do. And then talked to a couple of people, including actually people I used to work with in Number 10, to say, look, you know, because it was now sort of 2 a.m, and I'm thinking, can't announce this 2 a.m. So actually. Sometimes journalists, I've had my difficulties with journalists, but I actually spoke to journalists at the Press Association, and I said, look, can I give you this statement, but can you sit on it till 6 o'clock? Unless there's an avalanche on Twitter, it sort of comes out, and they agreed to do that. And then I couldn't sleep, and so I just sat and wrote it, and I wrote it in about, I don't know, half an hour, 25 minutes.
See, that's quite interesting, because I read what you wrote when I was coming up to London on the train in the morning, and I'd already written something. I literally bashed it out. I mean, I didn't know Charles that well, but I knew him well enough to want to write something, and I literally did it in 10 minutes on the train. And I find when you do that, it's actually quite cathartic, and you write your best stuff when it's just completely from the heart. I thought your tribute was so fantastic, because you just got him absolutely right.
But funny enough, when I started it, literally in the middle of the night, I did actually, it was all about alcohol. It was all about alcohol, and I showed it to Fiona in the morning, and she said, look, this is just not right, because there's so much more to him, and you shouldn't just write about that, because then it will make the rest of the media just make the whole thing about alcohol, and which was right. And so I went away and then redid it and put in all these memories that by then were just sort of, flooding in. And it was strange, because I was very, very friendly with Charles, but he... And I have found... this has hit me, if anything, as hard as when Philip Gould died, because Philip, we knew it was coming. And even though I've had moments where I've thought, do you know what, a bit like, there are other people we know in public life that you just worry one day you're going to get a phone call, they're going to be, and I've had those moments with Charles, but when they happen, it's just like you feel like you're being hit by a bulldozer. You can't believe it.
Had you talked to him many times since the election and when he lost his seat?
I talked a few times, and also I talked to him quite a lot during the campaign, because I think we were a bit worried about him. The first time I heard him say, "Do you know what? I think I'm on the way out," was last Christmas. And he just felt the SNP thing was unstoppable. I said, "Charles, don't be ridiculous. You're not going to lose. I mean, they love you up here. It's just not going to happen." He says, "Well, I think sometimes it goes beyond." Yeah. And then he sent me, I don't bet at all, as you know, but he was sending me these odds, and they were just getting shorter and shorter and shorter on the SNP winning. And by the day before the election, it was 3-1 on.
Even you were tempted at that point.
No, and he said it's all over. And actually, you talk about, did I prepare the eulogy that I wrote? Charles's speech at the count, you could tell he prepared that. And he'd had some time to prepare that. Sure. And I think that was a way of him. He was afterwards I spoke to him, and actually he was okay. He was very philosophical. He didn't take it personally. I did think it was funny the other day watching all the Vox Pops. Not a single person that didn't vote for him. I thought, shouldn't we be having a recount in Fort William? Everybody voted for him.
It is interesting, though. There are elections, and 97 was one of them. I remember Andrew Mitchell, who lost in 97, and he was in Gedling. I remember him telling me, he said, I constantly came across people who said, "Oh, Mr. Mitchell, we think you're a fantastic MP, but we're going to vote for that nice Mr. Blair."
Charles had the same.
Yeah.
Charles had exactly the same. He said he was walking up and down the high street in Fort William, people coming up as they always did. "Hello, Charles, how are you doing?" "Oh, I'm fine, how are you?" And da-da-da. He said, "Look, Charles, I just want to tell you, I think you're a fantastic MP, but I'm going to vote for the SNP because I just want them to get a clean sweep." And, okay, thanks for telling me, only tootle. But I think it's hard to work out why this is so kind of hit people in the way that it has. I mean, I'm just wondering, and you talk about the blog, I mean, yesterday's extraordinary. I mean, people blog the whole time, and you get a bit of feedback on Twitter and what have you. I had people stopping me in the street yesterday and saying, "I read that thing you wrote about Charles Kennedy, and God, he was such a great guy, and I wish I'd met him." And I
think the reason that your blog had such an impact, though, was that you kind of framed his alcoholism in a way that people felt they could then talk about it. Because what struck me when I woke up and heard the Today programme right from 6 o'clock, and it was breaking news then, was that his alcoholism wasn't even referred to. It was a sort of eulogy that was about 2/3 of Charles, not about the whole of Charles, and therefore inauthentic. And I think, therefore, when your blog went up, there was a sort of sigh of relief that here was Charles restored to the person, certainly at Westminster, that people knew.
Yeah, I think also that the thing about the drinking, it's like people saying, do you think he could have become a prime minister if he hadn't have been for the drink and all the rest of it? But that was part of who he was. It's like saying, could Abraham Lincoln have been a great president if he hadn't have had an even better president without depression? I mean, it's like, that's who he was. And I think there's a reason why it sort of has got home to people in the way that it has, is because people sensed he had real frailty as well as real strength. But
that's what people loved about him.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's why all his failures to turn up and so forth were forgiven.
I think the other thing that I was reflecting on, Fiona and I were talking about. Now I'll tell you what, I was going into a TV studio, and there was one of Charles's colleagues there, and I sort of just couldn't quite remember what Charles thought of him. So I texted somebody, I'm not saying who, and said, "Can you just remind me what Charles thought of X person?" And he just came back, "Useless and a creep, but never said so." And he wasn't nasty about people.
No,
just on that, Malcolm Bruce got into an awful lot of trouble this week, or was it last week, for admitting that sometimes politicians lie. And this is a case where a lot of Liberal Democrats did overtly lie about Charles Kennedy's drinking. Now, they did it
as
for
did
the best.
Charles.
Indeed. And they did it, I like to think, for the best of reasons, because they were trying to protect him, I imagine.
Do you know what? I think the other thing that's worth saying is, during that period, I'm not sure it would be the same now, but during that period, a lot of journalists did as well. Because they would be getting phone calls from news editors and editors saying, "Look, we're hearing that Charles Kennedy's wandering around the House of Commons completely, out of his brains." And journalists would say, no, I don't think so. Because they would protect him as well.
But that's also the way the Westminster Club operates, isn't it?
I think it's changed.
Well,
No?
I'm not there anymore. The relationship between the lobby and MPs that they like or rate or need is one which is much more tolerant.
But I found
protective.
even in the interviews the other day that I did an interview with Hugh Edwards on the BBC, and I could just tell, because he used to be a political journalist, as you know, just tell there was a sort of fondness. You know how mostly when these politicians die, and everybody goes on and they say, oh, they were wonderful. And yes, I said this, but actually... And there's something really hypocritical and inauthentic about it. There wasn't about what people were saying about Charles.
It was a bit like when John Smith died.
Yeah,
I think, because I mean that was a huge shock to people as well, and he was genuinely popular across the House, not just in the Labour Party, and it wasn't maybe quite the same, but I think there was certainly some similarities there. Well, we'll move on and talk to Alastair about a lot of other things. Maybe touch on the Labour leadership race, why Labour lost the election. 0345 6060 973. I'm sure.
I'm on television.
He doesn't want to do that.
LBC.co.uk.
My microphone's broken.
Where you can watch us as well. This is LBC. It's 7:45.
This is Adam Moore in the LBC Travel Centre on the M25. Clockwise delays after a lorry broke down between junction 14 and 15. That's Heathrow Terminal 4 round to the M4. Very slow. Queues back to junction 13 at Staines. There, lane 4 is blocked. Archway, Holloway Road heading out of town's partly blocked between Fairbridge Road and the Archway Gyratory. In Hackney, Castlin Road is blocked after a serious accident near the junction with Bradstock Road. Delays in Hammersmith, Fulham Palace Road's very slow at the moment. An accident blocking a lane as you head from Lily Road towards Hammersmith Broadway. The inside lane there near the Southern Bell pub is blocked. That's causing big queues back past Lily Road towards Putney. Keeping London moving, your next update is in 30 minutes.
LBC Travel.
With Citrix Go-To Meeting, helping you conduct meetings with the personal touch.
You can't count on sunshine in summer, but with a £400 trade-in on a new boiler, you'll get a dazzling deal from British Gas. And the price we say is the price you'll pay. Call 0800 754 754 or visit britishgas.co.uk. Hurry, offer ends June the 30th. Conditions apply.
Listen up then. We never realised that we could get a hefty government payout for innovation. Thought it was just for those high-tech boys down south. Not a down-to-earth bunch like us. We did it, thanks to you lot and the really helpful guys at Breakthrough Funding. Yeah! Sorry, just slipped out.
Easy money then, boss.
Not at all. It's a cash reward for showing how innovative ideas can reap benefits all round. Your company could qualify for Innovation Cash too. Find out online now by answering just 6 qualifying questions at breakthroughfunding.com. Yeah!
Bar stools, office chairs, shelving, whiteboards, plastic boxes, cleaning trolleys, cantilever racking, lockers and ladders, kick steps, pallet trucks, safes and stackers, archive boxes, office.
AJ Products has over 15,000 products for office, school, warehouse and industry. You will find surprisingly more at ajproducts.co.uk.
Taxi!
Where to, ma'am?
Harbour Central, Galliard Homes, brand new apartments, please.
We're at Canary Wharf Station. Why didn't you walk?
Well, I didn't realise we were that near.
Hey, these apartments are right around the corner from Canary Wharf.
That's good value for the address. They start at £350,000.
You know, I heard the foyer and interiors is all grand Manhattan style.
Yes, it's by Argent. They design in Mayfair.
I hear they work for megastars and movie directors. Hey, ma'am, you gonna get out?
We're here?
Sure we are. From 2018, they got that Crossrail 5 minutes from here, so you can get West Side real quick, too. But that's another story.
Galliard Homes, bringing a slice of New York to London Docklands from £350,000. Call 0203 770 6300 or visit harbourcentral.com.
Coming up at 8 on LBC, Clive Bull.
A major survey has revealed today that university students have doubts about whether their studies are worth the money, with many saying they would have chosen a different course altogether. With tuition fees at £9,000 a year, do you think that's a good investment?
Leading Britain's conversation, Clive Bull. This evening from 8 on LBC.
12 minutes to 8 here on LBC. You're listening to Ian Dale at Drive. It's our Newsmakers Hour with Tessa, Jowell, and Alastair Campbell is here to face our questions. I'm just seeing on your Twitter feed, Alastair, about to go to LBC with Tessa, Jowell, doesn't mention me, can't decide whether to wind her up with a Christian Wolmar live endorsement for mayor.
OK, well, I've decided. I'm not.
You're not. Yeah, that's a bit of a disappointment.
We'd pull the plug on him, wouldn't we?
Now, we are exactly 4 weeks away from the general election. I imagine this time 4 weeks ago, you were imagining a slightly different scenario than that which actually emerged.
Is it Thursday?
Yeah.
This time 4 weeks ago,
exactly.
Literally, I was in a room memorising paragraph 2.12 of the Cabinet Office Manual, which explained the constitutional position should the leader of the biggest party, which we thought might be the Conservatives, be unable to form a majority, and the leader of the second party became the Prime Minister. And I've got it there on my phone. So, and that, to be honest, is what we were thinking. And I can remember I was going to be the first person on in the studio.
I remember that.
Because they wanted me or Tessa, and I said it's got to be me because Tessa will want to go to LBC because that's her big love now that she's going for the London Marathon. So I was sitting with Paddy Ashdown and Michael Gove when the numbers came up, and do you know, Andrew Neil was one of the few people with the numbers, and I said, "Come on, Andrew, you can tell us." And he said, "No, I can't. You know that." He said, "But you're all going to be very shocked." And do you know what? For 5 seconds, I thought we'd won. And then, of course, the numbers came up, and Michael Gove said to me, "I don't think that's right." I said, "Don't you?" He said, "Well, if that's right at the top end of our expectations." Now, Linton Crosby's got all this sort of saying he had these polls, and I don't know if that's true or not. But do you know what? After a while, I didn't feel that shocked. I'd heard too many people in too many places saying they weren't voting for us. I'd heard too many people in too many places saying they were. I'd say the thing that really worried me was I was up in Lancashire a couple of weeks before, and I couldn't believe how many people were undecided. And I just thought, this doesn't feel right. They're not coming our way. And I think the Scotland thing was really, really interesting because, I mean, as you know, you've heard me say this millions of times, and so has Tessa, that my big criticism of Cameron is I don't think he's a strategic leader. I think he's very, very tactical. But they did have a strategy focused on the economy and leadership. And the minute that they saw this SNP rise in the polls, they hit this Labour SNP thing. Both those things. Leadership, they were saying Ed Miliband, weak leader, pulled around by a strong Scottish woman. And economy, the strong Scottish woman is going to make him tax more, spend more, borrow more. And the other thing is, and I'm saying nothing here I haven't said to Ed and to both Eds and to anybody else who would have listened for the last 5 years, is that unless I was always of the view that unless we fought back properly on this mess we inherited, there would come a point where people would say, I don't trust these guys with the economy.
And that's the message from this long piece in The Guardian today by Patrick Wintour, where he looks at why Labour lost. He's obviously got a lot of insight from somewhere into the different personalities and who was saying what when. And there was a group of Ed Miliband's advisors who wanted him to do exactly what you've just said, but he was the one that just wouldn't play ball with
Well,
them.
I think there were people with Ed who felt that he'd become leader as, if you like, the discontinuity candidate. That's a perfectly fair thing. And he wanted to do the same. And he also felt that he was going to be... He shouldn't be defending the past when he should be talking about the future. But my argument was always that you won't get the public listening to you about the future unless there's been a proper reckoning on the past. And we allowed that reckoning to be defined totally by our opponents.
And we risk, actually, doing the same again now by having a leadership contest, which, rather than a post-mortem, first of all.
Yeah.
And the leadership contest means that, the Tories now are very quickly moving back to the centre.
Mm.
And I think...
I'm not sure about that.
Well...
They're quickly battering us, as they did the last time.
Well, but also there's clearly an emerging split between number 10 and number 11. over Cameron recognising.
Well, hang on a minute. Well, let's talk about the Labour leadership.
Okay, all right. It's much easier to talk about the Tories,
well,
isn't it?
I'm sure it is. But, I mean, Liz Kendall seems to me to be the only one of, well, there are now 5 candidates who's actually got it, actually understands why it went wrong, and she's got a bit of a recipe to do something about it. I mean, who are you going to come out for in this contest? Have you made up your mind?
I'm going to keep my counsel. I'll tell you one thing I am going to do is that I think the Labour Party has got to understand that elections are about winning, and we should not be squeamish about that. And I think that one of the reasons I'm keeping my counsel, and I'm a very, very loyal Labour Party person, always have been, always will be, but I think that for 2 elections now, we've gone into those elections, all of us, including myself, guilty as everybody else, we've gone into them unwilling and unprepared actually to have the brutal discussions that you sometimes need to have about whether you can win with the team that you've got. So I'm holding my counsel, and partly so that in maybe 3 years' time, I won't hold my counsel in the same way that I've done in the past.
Are you saying they should have toppled the leader, or maybe there ought to be provision for that in the future? Because it was quite clear, I would say halfway through the last Parliament, that Ed Miliband wasn't really the person to take Labour into that election.
And I think if you're Ed Miliband and you've been elected as a leader, you're entitled to stay. You're entitled to ask for loyalty from people. And I certainly didn't want to be the person coming out and being, as it were, disloyal. And I went back and I helped a lot on the debates and all that stuff. And I will happily do that in the future. But what I'm not prepared to do, in the way that I think we've all done in the past, is to say there's something sort of evil and fundamentally wrong about at any point coming out and saying, look, this isn't working. And so one of the reasons I'm going to keep my counsel... So
there should be a bit more Tory, a bit more ruthless, and
definitely.
There ought to be provision.
Look, the reason the Tories have got a majority is because they are utterly ruthless. Look what they did to the Liberals. Look how they exploited the SNP. And I'm not saying we should be horrible like the Tories. You're a Tory and you're not horrible, Ian, but a lot of them are.
I'm an impartial radio.
I know you are. But I do think that the fact is, see, even when I hear Liz Kendall, who I think is, kind of making the weather, fine. But let's just think about the logic of some of this. You've got a situation, and this isn't me just speaking because I'm a, quotes, Blairite, and all these labels are ridiculous anyway. I mean, we've been out for a long time. But Tony was our most successful ever leader in terms of winning elections, which is what politics is largely about, because if you don't do that, you do nothing. And we've allowed ourselves, this is back to the thing about not defending the record, we've allowed ourselves to get in a position where even to talk about what New Labour was and what it did is, as is happening to Liz Kendall, is to be castigated as a Tory. Or where the others feel they have to say, oh, well, yeah, I liked all that schools and hospitals and da-da-da, but we wouldn't have to make any of those really, really difficult decisions that we had to make. And so I'm actually going to I'll always support Labour, I'll always be loyal, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut about who I might back.
Okay.
And I am going to agitate if they're not doing the job properly.
Just to be clear, in 4 years' time or 3 years' time, if they're not doing what you think they ought to be doing, you think there ought to be provision in the Constitution to change the leader at that point?
I think it should not be such a big deal. And I also think the public wouldn't find that odd, that actually, because if a leader's doing well, and you can have a perfectly open process where, and actually it'd be invigorating. And don't forget, here's the other thing we have to remember, the Tories are going to change their leader at some point. And that will give them a burst of energy and the ability to frame the language and of the campaign and make the weather again. So I don't think we should just let them have a monopoly on that. And so that's kind of where I am at the moment.
You see, there's
and on the mayor, I'm with Christian. Not.
Are you with Tessa though?
Of course he is. Tessa.
Next year there are two big elections, Holyrood and London. If we don't win Holyrood and or London, then we won't have won a major election for 15 years. And that's where Liz Kendall, it was the most brutal but realistic thing to say, that the Labour Party has no natural right to exist. We will only exist if we keep on regenerating.
We've nearly come to the end of our time. In 30 seconds, Alastair, there are many political pundits who think that Labour can't win the next election just because of the electoral maths.
Well, it's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, if Scotland doesn't shift, and let's just tell the truth, the Scottish nationalists, although they're not doing that great a job in government, they're doing a brilliant job politically. And it's going to be difficult. For us to win next time, we've got to win in seats that Tony didn't win in 1997.
And boundary changes.
So it's going to be tough. But that does not mean we can't do it, because I think we're living in these times of real flux and change, and big changes can come. You wouldn't have thought the Liberal Democrats would be down to 8 seats.
No.
So stuff can come, but the Labour Party, I agree with Tessa. I think we're having the leadership election when we're not really having a proper debate, and I wish the leadership election was coming at the end of that debate, not as the debate.
Alastair, thank you very much indeed. Tessa, good to see you again.
Very good to
I
see
would
you.
normally say I'll see you again next Thursday, but I'm off next week. So
Right,
you'll have the
I'll be on
company-
my own.
No, you won't. You'll be with John Stapleton.
They won't trust you. They don't trust you. They don't trust you to do it on your own, Tessa.
I will miss you, Ian, and enjoy whatever you're doing.
John Stapleton's a real
I'll see you the
problem.
week after.
I might back if John Stapleton went for mayor. I'd definitely go.
I am missing you already. Thank you very much, Alastair. Thank you, Tessa. I will be back tomorrow. I promise at 4. Coming next, it's Clive Ball.